Look at you, all alone with your little girl. Sad.
Don't talk about her.
What, you gonna cry? Not me. You.
Bully mocked a single dad in a cafe until he fought like a Special Forces veteran. The coffee shop on the corner of Delancey and Orchard had been there for 11 years, which in Manhattan meant it had outlasted 3 recessions, 2 pandemics, and approximately 400 competitor establishments that had arrived with better branding and left with unpaid leases. It was called Groundwork, and it was the kind of place that made no particular effort to be charming and was therefore genuinely so. Mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in 6 years, and coffee that tasted like someone actually cared how it was made. Daniel Reeves came in every Saturday morning at 8:15, which meant he arrived after the serious commuters and before the brunch crowd, in the quiet window when the place was half full and the line was short, and he could get a corner table without waiting. He was 39 years old, lean in the way of someone who had once been built for something specific and had never entirely stopped being that person, with dark eyes that moved through a room in a particular way, not anxious, not suspicious, just precise. The way eyes move when they have been trained to gather information automatically, whether they need it or not. He came every Saturday with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily had her mother's face and her father's stubbornness, which was a combination that made her simultaneously wonderful and exhausting. She wore her dark hair in 2 braids every Saturday by personal decree, carried a small backpack that contained a library book, a notebook for drawing, and a Ziploc bag of crackers she insisted on packing herself, even though Groundwork sold snacks. And she ordered the same thing every week, a hot chocolate with exactly 1 marshmallow, which she negotiated for with the barista, a young man named Tom, with the focused seriousness of someone conducting a formal transaction. Daniel ordered black coffee, and they sat at the corner table, and Lily drew or read while Daniel read the news or simply sat, which was something he had learned to do again only in the last 2 years. Simply sit. Be in a room without cataloging exits. Drink coffee without listening to the street outside for sounds that didn't belong. He had been out of the Army for 3 years. 14 years in, the last 6 with the 75th Ranger Regiment, which was not something he discussed in coffee shops or at school pickup, or anywhere that required follow-up questions he wasn't prepared to answer. He had separated honorably, moved back to New York where he had grown up, and taken a job doing security consulting for a firm called Meridian Risk, which paid well and asked nothing of him that his body could not provide without the parts of himself he had locked away. His wife, Clara, had died 22 months ago. A car accident on the Palisades Parkway in February. Black ice, a truck that came across the center line. Lily had been with Daniel that day. He had been the one to answer the phone. He had been the one to tell Lily that evening in the kitchen of their apartment, choosing words he had rehearsed 4 times in the hospital parking lot and which had still been entirely insufficient. He did not talk about Clara in coffee shops either. But he thought about her every Saturday morning while Lily drew in her notebook, and he considered this a form of gratitude, holding the thought of her in a quiet room with good coffee and their daughter's scratching pencil. This particular Saturday started the same way all of them did, and stopped being ordinary at 8:47. The man came in with 2 others, all 3 of them loud in the specific way of men who use volume as a form of territory. The first man was tall, maybe 6'2", thick through the shoulders, wearing a quarter-zip pullover with a finance firm's logo on the chest, and the unearned confidence of someone who had been the biggest person in most of his rooms, and had concluded from this that he was therefore the most important. His name, Daniel would later learn, was Greg Parton. His 2 companions were variations on the same theme, loud and large, and accustomed to accommodation. They ordered at the counter with the impatience of people who considered waiting in line an imposition rather than a social contract. They took a table in the center of the room, which was not available, by the simple mechanism of telling the couple sitting there that they needed the space, in the tone of people who had never seriously been told no. Daniel watched this from the corner. Lily did not look up from her drawing. Greg Parton looked around the room with the proprietorial ease of someone assessing what he owned, which was nothing in this room, and his gaze moved across Daniel and Lily and moved on, and then came back. It was the jacket. Daniel was wearing a faded olive jacket, soft from years of use, with a small ranger tab on the left shoulder that he had never removed because it had been there so long it had become part of the fabric. It was not a statement. It was just a jacket. But Greg Parton saw the tab, and saw the table, and saw a man who was clearly not a finance professional, and was taking up a corner table with a kid and a library book. And something in him decided this was an opportunity. "Hey," Greg said, loudly enough for the room to hear. "Nice jacket. You actually serve? Or did you buy that at an army surplus store?" The room did not go quiet. It shifted. The particular shift of people who have been minding their business, suddenly minding it much more carefully. Daniel looked up. He looked at Greg Parton with the precise, unhurried assessment of someone for whom the evaluation of threat was not an emotional process. Greg was big. He was loud. He had two companions who would follow his lead. He was also, Daniel noted with the certainty of someone who had spent years in rooms where this distinction was survival critical, not actually dangerous. He was a man who had spent his life winning through size and volume, which meant he had never seriously needed anything else. "I served," Daniel said. His voice was level and entirely quiet, which in the sudden hush of the coffee shop carried further than Greg's volume had. "Yeah?" Greg pulled out the chair across from him, uninvited, and sat in it with the loose, expansive posture of someone occupying more space than they were allocated. "What branch?" "Army." "How long?" 14 years. Greg smiled. It was the smile of someone who had decided the conversation was going the way he wanted it to. 14 years, and you're drinking coffee in a cafe on a Saturday morning. Didn't work out too well, huh? He looked at Lily, who had stopped drawing and was looking at the man in her father's chair with large, still eyes. "That your kid?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Cute," Greg said, in the tone people use for cute when they mean something else entirely. "You know what I was doing 14 years ago? Starting my first fund. You know what I'm doing now?" He named a number. It was a large number. He said it the way people say numbers when the number is the entire point of the sentence. The room was very quiet. Lily looked at her father. Daniel was looking at Greg Parton, and his expression had not changed by a single degree. "I think," Daniel said calmly, "that you should give the chair back to whoever was sitting in it before you took it." Greg blinked. In his experience, which was extensive in the specific domain of intimidating people who were smaller or quieter than him, this was not the line. The line was usually an apology, or a redirect, or silence. It was not a direct, entirely unemotional instruction, delivered in the tone of someone who considered the matter straightforward. "Excuse me?" Greg said. "The chair," Daniel said. "The couple at this table were here before you. They should have it back." Greg looked at his two companions, who were watching with the fixed expressions of men who had attached their social status to Greg's performance and were now less certain it was a safe investment. "Are you serious right now?" Greg said. He stood up, because standing was the next register of the only language he knew. He was 6'2" and 220 pounds, and he used both of these facts the way other people use words. "Do you know who I am?" "No," Daniel said. He had not moved. His coffee was still in his right hand. His left hand rested flat on the table, relaxed, which, to anyone who knew what to look for, meant the opposite of relaxed. "I could buy this entire block," Greg said. "I could buy every business on this street." "That doesn't answer the question about the chair," Daniel said. Greg Parton looked down at the man sitting calmly in the corner of a coffee shop on Delancey Street, and something in his assessment recalibrated, because the calm was wrong. It was not the calm of someone afraid to escalate. It was the calm of someone for whom the current situation did not yet constitute a situation. Greg made a mistake. He reached out and put his hand on Daniel's shoulder, which was the physical version of the volume he used in lieu of argument. A closing of space, a demonstration of physical reality. What happened in the next 4 seconds was later described by 6 different witnesses in 6 different ways, none of them entirely accurate, because what happened was too fast and too precise for casual observation to capture completely. What they agreed on was this. The hand that Greg Parton had placed on Daniel Reeves's shoulder was no longer on Daniel Reeves's shoulder. Greg Parton was no longer standing. He was on the floor beside the table, face down, his right arm immobilized behind him in a hold that required no visible effort to maintain, and which Greg had discovered, in the approximately 1 second since it was applied, was entirely escape-proof, regardless of how much of his 220 pounds he brought to bear against it. Daniel was kneeling beside him. His coffee, which he had set down at some point in the 4 seconds that had elapsed, was on the table. His expression had not changed. "I need you to calm down," Daniel said, in the same quiet, level voice he had used throughout the conversation. "When you're calm, I'll let you up." Greg Parton, face down on the floor of a coffee shop, in front of 6 witnesses and his 2 companions, said nothing. He was breathing very quickly. "Nod when you're ready," Daniel said. Greg nodded. Daniel released him and stood up in one movement and picked up his coffee. Greg got to his feet slowly, the specific slowness of a large man for whom the floor has just demonstrated something he had no previous framework for understanding. His face was the color of expensive wine. His 2 companions were standing very still. Daniel looked at them, and then at the couple who had been displaced from the center table. "You can have your table back," he said. The couple sat down. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Then Tom, the barista, from behind the counter, in a voice that was working very hard to stay steady, said, "Can I get anyone anything?" Greg Parton left. His 2 companions followed. The door swung shut behind them, and Groundwork exhaled collectively. Lily looked at her father. She had not moved during any of it. She had the expression of someone filing information into a category she already had. "Daddy?" she said. "Yes." "That man was very rude." "Yes," Daniel agreed. He sat back down. He picked up his coffee. He was. "Did they teach you that in the army?" "Some of it," Daniel said. "Some of it I knew already." Lily considered this, then returned to her drawing with the equanimity of someone who had assessed the situation and found it resolved. Daniel looked at his coffee. His hands were steady, which they always were. This was something he had come to accept about himself. The hands were always steady, during and after, and the difficulty, if there was difficulty, came later and quietly, which was why Saturday mornings at Groundwork existed in the first place. The woman came to the table 5 minutes later. She was sitting 2 tables over, and Daniel had clocked her when he came in. 40 or so, dark hair pulled back, well dressed in the particular way of someone who had stopped caring about being impressively dressed and had arrived at the more expensive destination of simply wearing what fit well. She had a laptop and a black coffee, and she had been working when Greg Parton came in, and had continued working throughout, and had now apparently decided she was done working. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "My name is Natasha Venn. I run a security and risk firm downtown. We work primarily with financial institutions and private families on threat assessment and protective detail." She slid a card across the table. "I've been looking for a director of training for 8 months. I watched what you just did, and I want to know if you're working." Daniel looked at the card. Venn's Security Partners. He had heard of them. They were good. "I'm at Meridian Risk currently," he said. "I know Meridian," Natasha said. "Good firm. Small accounts." She glanced at Lily, who was watching her with the same, still, evaluating eyes she had used on Greg Parton. "What you did just now wasn't just technique. The de-escalation first, the minimum force, the release the moment he was calm. That's a specific kind of training and a specific kind of judgment. I need someone who has both." Lily looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the card. "My daughter's school has pickup at 3:15, he said. "Every day." "The role is 8 to 3, Natasha said immediately. "I have 2 staff members with children at the same school. We built the hours that way, deliberately." Lily leaned across to look at the card. She studied it with the seriousness of someone who had learned that business cards were how important things started. "It has a shield on it, Daddy," she said. "That's a good sign." Natasha Venn looked at Lily for a moment, then back at Daniel. Something in her expression shifted toward genuine. "She's right," Natasha said. "It is a good sign." Daniel looked at his daughter. He looked at the card. He thought about Meridian and its small accounts and its adequate hours, and the way he had been moving through the last 2 years at precisely the velocity of someone trying not to go too fast or too slow. Trying to find the pace that a man moves when he is building something that can last. He thought about Clara, who had always said, when he was cautious in the way he was sometimes cautious, that caution was useful until it became a habit, and then it became something else. "I'd like to hear more about the role," he said. Natasha Venn nodded once, the nod of someone who has been in enough serious conversations to recognize when one has just become real. "Are you free Monday morning?" "I am," Daniel said. She picked up her laptop and her coffee. She looked at Lily one more time. "The hot chocolate looks good," she said. "It has exactly 1 marshmallow," Lily told her solemnly. "That's the right amount." Natasha Venn smiled, the way people smile when a child says something true that nobody else in the room had thought to say. She walked back to her table, gathered her things, and left. Daniel put the card in his jacket pocket, next to the small photograph of Clara that he carried folded in quarters, which was worn soft at the creases and which he had never once considered removing. Lily went back to her drawing. The scratch of her pencil filled the quiet corner of groundwork on Delancey Street, and Daniel drank his coffee and let himself sit in the particular peace of a Saturday morning when something has happened and settled, and the room has returned to itself, and the person beside you is drawing a horse that looks approximately like a horse, and your hands are steady, and outside the window the city is going about its ordinary business, entirely unaware that the most important 40 seconds of your recent life just took place over a mismatched wooden table in a coffee shop that has survived 11 years by making no particular effort to be charming. Some things you carry for 14 years and never put down. And some mornings, the right person sits 2 tables away and notices exactly what you are carrying and understands what it is worth. Lily looked up from her drawing. She turned the notebook toward him. She had drawn the café, the table, and 2 figures, one tall and one small, and above them, in the careful lettering of someone who had recently mastered cursive, she had written, "Us on Saturday." Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. "It's perfect," he said. Lily took the notebook back and added a detail, a cup, his coffee, on the table between them. Then she was satisfied, and she tucked the notebook into her backpack, next to the crackers and the library book, and she finished her hot chocolate, and 1 marshmallow was exactly the right amount. He started at Venn Security Partners on a Monday in November, which came in cold and gray the way November in New York always did, indifferent to anyone's plans or timelines. Natasha Venn met him in the lobby of their downtown office, a converted floor of a building on Fulton Street that looked nothing like a security firm from the outside and everything like one from the inside. The particular organized precision of a workspace where the people who use it have precise professional habits and do not leave things where they do not belong. She showed him the training facility on the 3rd floor, which was serious and well-equipped and showed signs of regular, heavy use. She introduced him to the 4-person training team he would be directing, all of them former military or law enforcement, all of them shaking his hand with the brief, assessing grip of people who recognized something in his posture before he had said a single word. She showed him the case files he would be working with. Corporate executives, private families, one foreign diplomatic mission that she described only in general terms, and the training curricula that the firm currently ran, which were good, and which Daniel could see, within 20 minutes of reading them, had 3 significant gaps. He told her about the gaps at the end of the morning, in her office, with a kind of directness that he had never entirely learned to modulate. He expected her to be defensive. She took notes. "That's exactly what I hired you to fix," she said. "Start Monday." He started Monday. He rewrote the first curriculum in 2 weeks, working at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep. His own notes from 14 years of training spread around him in a system that made sense only to him, and which Lily had once described as looking like a tornado had opinions. The revised curriculum was tested in January with 4 new protective detail agents. Their performance improvement over a 6-week assessment period was 23% above the firm's previous cohort baseline. Natasha sent the numbers to Daniel in a message that said simply, "I told you." He replied, "The gaps were obvious." She replied, "Only to someone who knew where to look." In March, one of Venn Security's clients, a technology CEO named Raymond Cho, requested a personal meeting with the head of training after his protective detail had managed a threat incident using a de-escalation protocol Daniel had written. The incident had been resolved without physical contact, without law enforcement involvement, and without any public awareness that a threat had occurred. Raymond Cho called it the most professionally handled security situation he had ever been adjacent to, which was, he said, a backhanded compliment since he had not known it was happening at the time. Daniel met with Raymond Cho on a Thursday. Raymond was 46, self-made, the founder of a data infrastructure company called Archon Systems that operated data centers across 12 countries. He was also, Daniel would discover in the first 10 minutes of conversation, genuinely curious in the way of people who have built serious things and understand that the building required them to ask questions they did not already know the answers to. I want to understand the de-escalation protocol, Raymond said. Not the mechanics, the philosophy. Daniel looked at him. The philosophy is that most situations that feel like they require force don't, he said. Force is the last tool because it has the most consequences. Everything before force. Positioning, communication, presence, the management of ego in a room is both more effective and less expensive. Ego management, Raymond repeated. Every incident I have ever responded to that escalated to force escalated because someone's ego made de-escalation feel like losing, Daniel said. My job is to make the other option feel like winning, fast enough that the moment for force never arrives. Raymond Cho was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I have a board presentation in 3 weeks where I need to present a loss to my investors. I've been dreading it because it feels like a concession. He paused. You just described the exact thing I need to do differently. Daniel looked at him. I described a security protocol. You described how to make the other option feel like winning, Raymond said. That works in a boardroom too. Daniel sat with this for a moment. Then, because it was true, and he saw no reason to withhold things that were true, he said, Yes, it does. Raymond Cho left the meeting, delivered the board presentation 3 weeks later, and sent Daniel a note afterward that said the presentation had gone better than any loss presentation in his company's history. He did not explain further. He did not need to. Lily asked, that evening over dinner, how Daniel's day had been. He told her he had talked to a man about ego management and boardroom presentations. Lily thought about this carefully. Is that like when Tyler Brennan at school says he doesn't want the last cookie, but he actually does? And if you just give it to him without making a big deal, he says thank you. But if you make him ask for it, he says he didn't want it anyway. Daniel looked at his daughter. Yes, he said. That is exactly like that. I figured that out in 2nd grade, Lily said, returning to her pasta. He looked at her for a moment, this 8-year-old with Clara's face, and her own particular brand of clean, unceremonious intelligence, eating pasta at the kitchen table in an apartment that was slowly, quietly, becoming the kind of home that a person builds, one Saturday morning at a time, 1 cup of coffee, 1 exactly right marshmallow, 1 conversation in a lobby with someone who had seen something worth seeing and known what to do with it. He thought about Clara the way he thought about her every evening, not with the sharp, crushing weight of the first year, but with the softer, more complicated ache of someone who has learned to carry a thing properly, which does not mean it is light, only that you have found the right way to hold it. He thought about a coffee shop on Delancey Street, and a man who had used size and volume in lieu of argument, and had discovered, in 4 seconds on the floor of a café, that neither of those things was what a room actually required. He thought about Natasha Venn sitting 2 tables away with her laptop and her black coffee, watching. And he thought about the card in his jacket pocket, next to the folded photograph, and the shield on it, and his daughter's voice telling a stranger in a coffee shop that 1 marshmallow was the right amount. It was, he thought. It was exactly the right amount of everything. Outside the kitchen window, New York moved through its evening with its usual comprehensive indifference to the small, significant things happening in its apartments and its offices and its coffee shops. 14 years of training, 3 years of rebuilding, 22 months of Saturdays at groundwork, and a drawing in a notebook that said, in careful cursive above 2 figures at a wooden table, "Us on Saturday." He would have it framed. He had decided this on the walk home. He had not mentioned it to Lily yet, because she would have opinions about the frame. She usually did.